Haunting Ground is a survival horror game released by Capcom in 2005. This title has a very interesting development history that began back in 2003 with another game called Clock Tower 3. Clock Tower 3 was developed by both Sunsoft and Capcom. If you're unaware, the Clock Tower series is a set of horror games where you play as a young girl who's being pursued by a stalker-like character. Your main gameplay mechanics center around hiding and using items to trick or damage your pursuer. Don't worry, we'll be talking more about this particular series in the future. When Clock Tower 3 released, it didn't review or sell very well and was considered a massive failure in the eyes of Capcom. This failure prompted the company to move away from the Clock Tower license altogether. The unfortunate thing about this is that while Clock Tower 3 was originally in development, Capcom was also gearing up to make a fourth entry to the series, but those plans quickly changed due to their recent financial failure. So the Clock Tower 4 project just wasn't gonna happen. This led Capcom to taking the ideas they originally had in mind for CT4 and making a brand new game out of it. What came from this was Haunting Ground, or as it's known in Japan, Demento. Throughout the game's development, the dev team knew they wanted to make a game with a female protagonist trapped in an isolated location, much like a Clock Tower game, but they were also nervous that this protagonist may not appeal to retailers or audiences like CT3's protagonist. The devs decided to give this female character a dog companion that would defend her from her pursuers. It's interesting because according to reports I found online, the idea of a young girl trapped in a castle with a dog as her only line of defense apparently was created by Resident Evil 2 writer Noboru Sugimura as a potential idea for an RE4 prototype. Sugimura is credited as this game's scenario draft writer, so it makes sense. And also makes this title a Frankenstein's monster of a game. Used to be a Clock Tower game with the rejected story idea of a Resident Evil. I actually quite like the sound of that. Haunting Ground was officially revealed at TGS 2004 and fully released only a year later. I remember seeing this game on store shelves when it first came out, but I never actually played it when it released. I was really busy with a few other games. One of those titles being the phenomenal Resident Evil 4. Haunting Ground didn't do very well in the sales department and received mixed to average reviews from critics. I often wonder why Capcom would release this game the same year as their other mega game RE4. I think they were probably put off by what happened to Clock Tower 3 and just released both games as a safety precaution. You know, if people buy RE4, they might also buy another cool Capcom horror game too. Well, I can tell you from being alive back then that I chose RE4 over Haunting Ground. I was still interested in Haunting Ground, but as the years went by, I totally forgot about it. I rediscovered this game while talking to a friend online, and as soon as I looked it up after my chat, I remembered it immediately. I was instantly interested in this game again, and I went to eBay and Amazon to look for prices and was blown away by what I found. Haunting Ground is super expensive in the United States. I guess American retailers didn't get many copies of the game because it's very rare, like FF7 mint in box rare. After this discovery, I followed the game on and off for many years until I was lucky enough to finally get a physical copy. I never spoiled the game for myself, so even playing it fresh all of these years later, I was still very surprised and shocked by what the game had to offer. I think that this game has a very interesting story and great game mechanics, and that's why I'm very excited about today's video. So without wasting any more time, let's take a deep dive into the bone-chilling world of Haunting Ground. Haunting Ground's story begins with our main character, Fiona Belli, unconscious and locked in a cage within a cold, dark dungeon. We see an unusually large man chopping up meat next to the cage. The man approaches Fiona, reaching inside the cage, but is scared away by a lightning storm outside. Fiona is also awoken by the storm and is baffled by her current situation. After quickly looking around, she notices that the lock on her cage is open. Stepping outside of the cage, Fiona begins to hear a low growl coming from behind her. Once she turns around, a mysterious creature jumps out from underneath the table, fleeing the dungeon. Fiona picks up a collar dropped by the creature. The tag reads, Huey. Dropping the collar, Fiona heads for the exit and steps out of the dungeon. Taking our first steps outside, we find ourselves in the courtyard of a medieval castle. Heading up a set of stone stairs, we open the door to a well-furnished and fairly modern-looking room. The room is filled with a lot of paintings of very noble-looking men. Unfortunately, there isn't much else to do in this room, so we proceed through another door, until a woman seemingly appears out of nowhere behind Fiona. This woman appears to be a maid. She's gathered a set of clothing for Fiona, but ignores all of Fiona's questions about their current location. She's acting very robotic. The maid begins speaking to one of the paintings hanging on the wall, and as Fiona looks at this painting, she gets a headache and falls to the ground. The maid disappears as Fiona collects herself. Slipping into our new set of clothes, we head into the castle in search of anything that can tell us where we are. As we search through the castle's rooms, we find strange items, suspicious sights, and a lot of research pertaining to the alchemical arts. None of these terms mean anything to us or Fiona right now, so we continue onward. As Fiona walks down a large corridor, she can hear heavy breathing. Peeking around the corner, we see a very large shadow cast on the wall, and then something fly towards us. Recoiling in fear, we see that it's just a doll, but we also hear very heavy footsteps coming our way. It's the large man from the dungeon. He looks excited to see Fiona. The man begins running at us. Time to go. Returning to the bedroom, we hide under the bed and watch as the man desperately searches the room. After a while, he leaves, giving us the opportunity to escape in the other direction. That was close. Getting back to where we once were, we find a few more strange sights, like a giant golem blocking a door in a full-on alchemy lab. After solving a simple puzzle involving the golem, it falls apart and we continue through the previously blocked door. After heading down a ladder into the castle's garden, we find another locked door and the entrance to the castle's library, where we can hear someone playing a piano from up above us.
Ah, Fiona. I see you finally awakened. There's something that I've wanted to show you for quite some time. Pull away that sheet behind you. Beautiful, isn't it? That, my dear, is what you will become in the future. Go ahead. You may touch it. You will be mine, Fiona.
That's not creepy in the slightest. After this strange encounter, we pick up a key from the table and head back through the garden. Unlocking the garden door, we find ourselves in the kitchen. Heading down into the pantry, we discover a map of the castle. This'll come in handy. Heading back up, we're surprised by the large man who is hiding behind the counter. Fiona runs out of the kitchen, but she trips and falls during the chase. The brute catches up to her, but before he can do anything, we hear a mysterious voice call out, telling the brute to stop. The large man begins to leave as a hooded figure approaches Fiona. The hooded man's name is Ricardo, the keeper of the castle. Ricardo tells Fiona that her parents recently died in a car crash and that Fiona is now the new heir to this castle. Overwhelmed by this information, Fiona passes out, then wakes up again in the bedroom from before. Fiona is in complete disbelief by what's happening to her. This has to be a bad dream. As Fiona refocuses, she can hear whimpering from outside. Looking through a window, she sees a dog tied to a tree by the neck. We head down into the courtyard to help out the dog. Fiona frees the poor thing and heads back up to the bedroom. In the bedroom, we run into the brute Debilitas again. This time he begins terrorizing Fiona and corners her, but the dog from before has come to our aid. After biting and severely damaging Debilitas's hand, the monster flees, and it's here where the game truly starts. This is all I'm going to cover story-wise. The intro for this game is so good. It perfectly sets up all of the characters you'll be interacting with and running away from throughout the course of the game. Haunting Ground has a surprising amount of depth with its lore. Every single character and place has a backstory and a lot of information you can read about in the various files you'll be finding on your journey. It's all super interesting stuff. Haunting Ground is also extremely dark with its tone and subject matter. This game has a lot of situations that evoke imagery of rape, cannibalism, and, as you saw earlier, pregnancy. Unwanted pregnancy. Oh, and straight up incest. I am not even kidding about that. It's crazy. It can get pretty intense at times, but I honestly think that the writers on this game did a pretty good job at presenting these concepts in a more tasteful way than other games of this time would have done. Nothing is totally in your face or gratuitous. When I was doing research for this video, I found some older reviews and discussions online, some of which said that Fiona's outfit is needlessly sexual, and I would disagree with that statement. All of the people that Fiona deals with in this game are all either crazy, jealous, or just total creeps. Fiona doesn't really choose to wear this outfit either. It's given to her as her only option by someone who wants to stalk and see her as eye candy. All of that dark subject matter that I talked about relates to Fiona's outfit too. Being someone's object of sexual desire or being forced into things are common female-themed fears. It's unsettling and creepy because it's a real thing. This is the type of horror this game is exploring, and I find it very interesting while also making me uncomfortable. And isn't that what true horror is? I just thought I should mention this briefly because I find it odd how people could misunderstand Fiona's appearance when the story of the game actually does a pretty good job at making this theme clear from the start. I will say though that those older reviews definitely have a point when it comes to Fiona's unlockable costumes. Those are pure sex appeal and completely immersion breaking, but they are also optional, just saying. Anyway, back to the actual story. Just like most classic survival horror games, Haunting Ground starts out relatively small with its basic, "Where am I? Run away from monster," mystery, and then by the end it goes off the rails with some over-the-top crazy cosmic horror. I just love when survival horror games do things like this. Oops, I just uncovered a creepy conspiracy, or accidentally awakened an ancient immortal being. Great. Haunting Ground definitely goes to some crazy places in the endgame. Some of this stuff is so off the walls and disturbing. I really like the story overall. It explores a lot of interesting things that you don't really see in horror games that often. And I think that Fiona is honestly an underrated survival horror legend. She doesn't have a ton of personality, but she goes through a lot of heavy stuff and still comes out on top as a much stronger person than she was in the beginning of the story. Which, by the way, I feel that the story and gameplay of Haunting Ground go hand in hand like any classic survival horror game should. Haunting Ground uses a fixed camera that follows Fiona's movement through the environment. You move around using traditional 3D movement controls, and it feels really good and precise, but I did find myself getting hung up on camera changes while enemies were chasing after me. This can be annoying sometimes. Like, you're running away and then the camera changes, and all of a sudden the direction you're pushing the movement stick forces you into the arms of your pursuer. I really wish this game had a tank control option because I'm much more used to that for games like this. This probably won't be a problem for those of you who haven't been playing the first 4 Resident Evil games for the past 20 years like me. The game's combat situations are really tough, but fighting is not the focus of enemy encounters. Running and hiding is what you'll be doing most of the time, much like a clock tower game. Fiona can kick and do a running charge attack, but none of these moves will really do any damage because Fiona isn't a fighter. She can barely walk up a flight of stairs. You can, however, find items that stun your enemies for a small amount of time, giving you the chance to run away. These items can be placed on the ground like a landmine or straight up thrown at your pursuer. I should mention that the game also has a crafting system where you can create these offensive items at alchemy stations scattered throughout the game. The crafting system is really weird and complicated at first. It took me a while to figure out how to craft things properly. During the crafting minigame, you have to stop these colored spheres from spinning around at the right time and line up specific colors to create certain items. You can actually create hidden accessories for Fiona that upgrade her stats too, like the necklace that completely makes Fiona invisible when she's not moving. Very cool stuff like that. I think you'll be finding more than enough items out in the field, so you don't really have to worry about crafting things if you don't understand the minigame. What you should worry about is making good use of the game's hiding spots to effectively avoid enemy encounters. This includes hiding under beds, inside of closets, and crouching down behind objects. Crouching behind things can sometimes yield very surprising results. It feels very good watching a stalker just stroll right by you, not even noticing that you're just sitting there on the ground. It's pretty great. By the way, Fiona also has invisible stamina and panic meters that you have to manage during the course of the game. Fiona's stamina is represented by her movement, so the lower your stamina is, the slower you'll move. If you run for too long, Fiona will have to stop and catch her breath. You'll have to carefully think about running and walking in order to conserve your stamina and not get caught in a sticky situation. The panic meter is affected by Fiona taking damage, seeing disturbing sights, and being chased by a pursuer. If Fiona's panic meter fills all the way, she'll have a full-on panic attack where you lose partial control over her movement. She'll just start running around like crazy, and the screen will become completely distorted. You just sort of have to pray that Fiona will snap out of this before an enemy has the chance to catch up with you. It's a little messed up, and I kind of wish the devs decided to do something else with the panic attack system because it feels kind of random and a little cheap. You can't really tell how much panic will be gained by a certain enemy attack. Some will just knock you down, and others can put Fiona into a panic attack 0 to 100 style. I've played the game a bunch of times, so I know how to kind of cheat the panic attack system when it happens, basically by running in circles. For new players, I can imagine this getting pretty frustrating if someone is just trying to learn the game, but they're getting hit with cheap panic-inducing shots from enemies. I think the panic attack system could have been implemented a little bit better, but you can also deal with them once you get the hang of the game mechanics. I'd like to briefly mention how awesome it is that this game, unlike other survival horror titles, has a fully interconnected and load screenless world. world. Unlike games like Silent Hill or Resident Evil, in Haunting Ground, once you pass through a door, there is no loading screen. You literally just walk through and into the next room. As soon as I noticed this, I immediately imagined how much worse this game would have been if it did have loading screens. It would completely break the immersion and tension of being chased around. I really like this, and I thought it was important to bring up because it shows that the dev team really wanted the chases to feel real and to make you feel truly helpless. Okay, let me tell you about the most impressive thing this title brings to the survival horror table. In Haunting Ground, your main line of defense is your trusty pup Huey. Huey is the most realistic video game dog of all time. During gameplay, you can give Huey orders by pushing the right stick. You can tell him to search the area, attack enemies, stay where he is, follow you, and finally, compliment or scold him. The cool thing about Huey is that he doesn't feel like an extension of Fiona. He feels like his own entity roaming around the game world. At the start of the game, Huey doesn't really know Fiona that well, so he won't always listen to your commands. You actually have to build up a trust in order for him to effectively fight enemies and follow Fiona around. There's actually an invisible friendship meter that goes up if Fiona bonds with Huey. If Huey successfully defends you against a pursuer, give him a nice pat on the head and congratulate him. Or you can always reward him with some food. He'll even give you a high five if he likes you. Very cute. Huey's trust in Fiona can also drop if you push him too hard during combat or if you attack him, which in turn Huey will also attack Fiona. So be nice to the good boy, he's just trying to get out of this castle too. I can see people getting annoyed with the time you need to invest into Huey, but I feel it adds to the believability of the situation. It's a nice progression having Huey just roam around doing his own thing, not even knowing if you can rely on him for help in the beginning of the game, to having him follow your orders with laser precision by the end of the game. It's really cool to see. During combat, Huey's main attacks are bites, where he holds an enemy in place, giving you time to escape and hide. Once Huey sinks his teeth into an enemy, you can encourage him to apply more pressure, doing extra damage. But I wouldn't recommend doing this because if Huey does too much damage to the pursuer, they'll most likely throw Huey aside, inflicting damage on him. And the last thing you want in any combat situation is to have a wounded dog. If Huey takes too much damage, he'll play dead, leading the enemies to ignore him. So don't worry if it seems like your pup just died, he'll be back on his tiny feet in no time. I think Huey is a great gameplay mechanic, and a wonderful little sidekick. His AI is super cool and impressive for the time. I probably wouldn't feel as connected to Huey if he was just Fiona's consistent attack button. He feels like a real dog just roaming around, and I had a lot of fun actually training him to listen to my orders. Now that I think about it, there's something so familiar about Huey. Like I've seen him before. What was it? Is Haunting Ground a prequel to RE4? Are all Capcom games in a shared universe? Probably not, but this is a very cool reference to Huey. RE4 and Haunting Ground were in development at the same time, so it makes sense that both games' dev teams would collaborate in some way. It also goes back to what I said earlier about this game's initial story concept being RE4. It's super cool. I love RE4. I love Huey. He's a good boy. Now it's time to talk a little bit about the enemies you'll be encountering in this title. There are 4 unique stalkers in Haunting Ground. All of them are introduced to you at the beginning of the game. As you progress, you'll be encountering each stalker one after the other, in their own section of the Belly Castle and mansion. The first stalker, Debilitas, the giant ogre, is pretty easy to avoid. Debilitas is not the smartest predator. You can distract him with Huey, run and hide, and then wait for him to pass by. If Debilitas spots you and begins attacking, he will do some pretty big damage against Fiona. If you decide to make Huey attack him often, he'll become way more aggressive, running after you at a much greater speed and attacking Huey more consistently, which is both horrifying and heartbreaking to see. Leave my doggy alone, you big jerk. During the Debilitas section of the game, there are a few puzzles that you have to complete in order to progress. You better believe that this big guy can totally wander into the puzzle rooms, forcing you to run and hide because you can't interact with anything if an enemy is nearby. This can be really annoying on your first playthrough, but once you figure out the puzzles and replay the game, this isn't really a problem anymore. I should mention that each stalker does have a boss battle, which are all different and puzzle themed. So you won't be fist fighting anyone, you'll be pushing things around or tricking the bosses into doing something that may result in their death. The second stalker, Daniela the maid, is much faster than Debilitas and is relentless when chasing you. You really have to outsmart or down her using items or Huey's attacks. I think Daniela is really interesting. She's persistent in her chases, but she also won't mess with you if you find her doing her job. Like if you see her dusting or messing around with something in the environment, she'll just do that, so you can use these opportunities to your advantage, solving puzzles or looking for items while she's busy. Daniela will also use some of your tricks against you, so if you run away from her and try hiding in a closet or under something, there's a chance that she'll be there waiting to surprise you. Things like this really make Daniela feel like a very smart predator in comparison to Debilitas. I really like Daniela. Her entire section of the game felt the most fair, in my opinion, like you're on equal ground with her. I can't really say the same for the game's third and fourth stalkers, though. The third creep you'll be dealing with is Ricardo, the castle's keeper. Ricardo is very fast, never gives up chasing you, and has a freaking gun. That's right, he can just shoot you from far away if he feels like it. By the way, 95% of the time, one bullet will put down Fiona for good. It's very rare that you'll survive a gunshot in this game. I think this part is the most unfair and bordering on annoying. You have to do a pretty deep puzzle where you stop off at a bunch of different machines to turn a stone into a key item. You have to do this in a particular order while being chased, and if you mess up the order, you'll have to start the puzzle all over again. Like I said earlier, this problem isn't really a thing on repeat playthroughs, but on your initial playthrough, it can be very frustrating. The fun parts about dealing with Ricardo are that you can trick him up in certain rooms, like this one where the floor is decaying. If he follows you inside, he'll fall through and he won't come back for a while. Please use this to your advantage. I highly recommend it. After Ricardo, there are two more stalkers, but I won't be talking about the last one in case you want to play this game. The fourth encounter is insane. You have to deal with an invisible enemy. Yeah, you heard that correctly. As you can imagine, this section is really tough. You have to ascend a giant water tower while dealing with potentially being attacked or grabbed by something you cannot see. Huey actually does a really good job at sensing the invisible bastard when he's nearby, though. As tough as this part can be, it's not very long, so if you play smart and use Huey's senses to your advantage, you can get through the tower pretty quick. So that's as far as I'll go with talking about how the stalkers work. I think they're all really well designed and they function in very cool ways. There are also some minor enemies like these balls of energy that can increase Fiona's panic status when coming into contact with her. And these weird little baby things that just latch onto Fiona and scream real loud. The scream is annoying, but it's also very satisfying kicking these little jerks in the face. All of the minor enemies feel like roadblocks that are meant to hold you still for a certain amount of time so the real stalkers can get closer to you during the chases. Not a huge threat, but very dangerous if you're not being careful or perceptive. Besides combat encounters, the other very prominent gameplay thing in Haunting Ground are its puzzles. On your first playthrough, some of the puzzles can be real brain busters, looking very intimidating at first glance, but most of the time end up being pretty simple. Some puzzles use Huey's dog abilities in cool ways. You'll have to give him orders to stand on pressure plates and use his amazing acrobatic skills to get key items that are high off the ground. There are also a few puzzles where you have to type out certain words onto stone plate keys and insert them into special locks that open optional areas and treasure chests. I don't know if any of you guys do this, but for older PS1 and PS2 games, I write the puzzle solutions in the game's manual notes section, making all of the puzzles even more of a cakewalk on repeat playthroughs. Let me know if you guys ever did that too. I just thought that'd be fun to bring up. I think all of Haunting Grounds' puzzle stuff is great. It's really well thought out and very unique to Haunting Grounds' world. Finally, once you finish the game, you'll unlock a hard difficulty mode which changes the appearances of all the stalkers and actually adds more of those smaller roadblock enemies to the early game. This mode truly lives up to its name. It is so difficult. I haven't even finished it yet. Depending on which endings you get, you'll unlock alternate costumes. These costumes aren't just cosmetic. They also give you a certain weapon. For example, with the sexy cowgirl outfit, you acquire a six-shooter, which makes short work of enemy encounters. It's really satisfying getting the chance to shoot Ricardo in his dumb face. You'll also be unlocking a new mode where you get to play as Huey. I guess his AI translated really well to player control, so they decided to make a full mini-game out of it. It's pretty fun and simple. All you have to do is escort Fiona through certain parts of the game. There are a ton of unlockables, like costumes, secret cutscenes, and gameplay events that you can experience that add a lot of replay value to this game. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck out of this title. Well, I mean, it's a little overpriced now, but you know what I mean. Can I just say that this game still looks really good for a PS2 title. You can tell that the devs really squeezed every last drop of power out of the PS2 to make these environments look as good as they do, while also making everything interconnected. It really reminded me of an early PS3 game in its presentation. Every single environment has a ton of detail and pretty good texture work. A lot of these rooms are very memorable, even when you just go through them once. The room covered in dolls and eyeballs really stood out to me, as well as the first dark outdoor hallway. It's so cool looking, and straight out of a Resident Evil game. The character models are realistically proportioned but stylized in their designs. All of these characters are very unique in their looks and memorable in their character traits. I love how this title goes from a simple castle environment to a spooky abandoned mansion similar to Resident Evil, to a full-on alchemy lab that looks like it was designed by someone who was losing their mind, and finally, a fully insane Lovecraftian netherrealm. The entire game feels like a descent into madness. Haunting Ground's music and sound design is also really good. Now let me say this really quickly. The quality of the voices sound a lot better in the cutscenes than they do during gameplay. And the reason for this is because most of the sounds, like voices and music, actually use the PS2's hardware to dynamically adjust the pitch and speed of certain tracks to enhance the feeling of chases. Dynamic music in video games will always get an A+ from me. The actual musical tracks are all very good too. You'll mostly be hearing a lot of ambient, atmospheric music similar to an RE or Silent Hill game. Each stalker has their own theme that increases in speed and tension the closer they get to you, and this is where the dynamic music comes into play the most. It's both terrifying and hilarious when you open a door and a stalker is right there on the other side and their music is already at the highest speed because they're right next to you. To hear myself yelp loudly in fear and then laugh at the situation is a really fun concoction of emotions to feel while playing a video game. So yeah, Haunting Ground's presentation is great and definitely holds up for a PS2 title. As I replayed this game for this video, one thought kept running through my mind. Why isn't this game more popular? Why don't more people know about Haunting Ground? Like I said at the start, RE4 is somewhat to blame. Or maybe Capcom for releasing both games very close to one another. Whatever the case may be, Haunting Ground is so underrated. I think it's a great game that more people should definitely know about and experience. I don't normally like hide-and-seek horror games, but Haunting Ground has so much more going for it than other scary games where you play as an incompetent buffoon who can't defend himself for some reason. All of Haunting Ground's game mechanics are interesting, complex, and really fun once you master them. You'll feel like some kind of sleek trickster slipping past your enemies while your badass little dog distracts them. I highly recommend playing this game. If you can somehow get a physical copy, do it. You won't be disappointed, especially if you're a hardcore survival horror fan. If you have a Japanese PSN account, you can actually download a digital version of the game to your PS3. I really wish this option was available worldwide. I wouldn't recommend playing an emulated version of this game because from what I can tell, most ISOs are missing textures and have some pretty wonky shadow effects on the accelerated video settings, which totally sucks if you want to play the game in high-resolution widescreen. With all of that said, if you're still interested in this game, definitely look through your local retro video game stores or flea markets. If you seriously cannot find this game anywhere, then go for the emulated version. Or, you know, shell out hundreds of dollars for a copy online. I just want more people to play this game because it's so interesting. It's such a mysterious piece of horror game history, being a weird amalgamation of discarded game ideas that somehow works really well. I wish that Capcom would re-release this title on every version of the PSN store. I think it's worth preserving. As much as it may seem like Capcom has forgotten about this game, they did add an extra DLC costume for Cammy in Street Fighter V that dresses her up as Fiona, so they still know that this title exists. The way Capcom has been taking risks with some of their older IPs recently has me kind of hopeful that we may actually see a Haunting Ground re-release at some point in the near future. It may be wishful thinking on my part, but once you've played it, there's no denying that Haunting Ground is a true Capcom classic and a hidden horror gem. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very fun to make, and I hope I potentially got you more interested in playing Haunting Ground because it's incredible. It's weird because it's a very well-made game that clearly came out at the wrong time. I feel like it probably would have gotten more attention if it maybe released a year earlier or later. Anyway, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing and checking out my Patreon link in the description box. You can support this channel for as little as $1 per month. I also offer a pretty cool Patreon exclusive show called Inside the Sphere at $5. It's more of a podcast style, what I've been playing type of series. Shout out to everyone currently supporting me on Patreon. I love all of you guys. Also, big thanks to Dross Art for making Fiona Susie for this video. I absolutely love it, and it might be my favorite avatar so far. Once again, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you all in the next video. Later!